I'm a big fan of planting seeds directly into the soil, but sometimes there is an advantage to growing seedlings in a tray or in some type of planter that you then actually plant out. The main advantage is gaining on the season, that you're actually getting them going earlier inside, as I do with tomatoes, and we saw in the last video how the tomatoes are progressing. They've now been potted on and they're doing really well. Planting out seedlings, of course, gives a person a sense of immediate achievement when gardening. You seed the plants in the garden straight away rather than have to wait 2 or sometimes even 3 weeks for them to germinate and come through. Now today I'm wanting to plant some Blue Lake climbing bean seeds. It's too cold still in the soil, too wet. It's just not time to put them outside yet. But last year I grew some in egg cartons and they did reasonably well, and I thought they gave me a little bit of a head start. So this year again I thought I would plant some in some planters, get them going, and I'll also probably put some seeds direct in probably 2 to 3 weeks time when the weather has warmed up a little bit. Now I used the egg cartons last year and it worked reasonably well, but really I think the egg cartons are a little bit shallow for the roots and I'd like something deeper. I have a number of recycled options available to me, traditional trays, seed trays, and also some larger plug type trays which I could use. The disadvantage of these is that to get them out, no matter which one I used, I would need to disturb the roots, and I would prefer not to do that. So today I decided to go and make some planters of my own. They're a plug type which I can actually get the plugs out without actually disturbing the root. I started by cutting some PVC pipe to length. Now the length and the size of pipe which you use really depends on what you're planting. I'm working with what I had available, and also considering that beans, and I'll probably do the same with zucchinis, are a fairly large seedling. So I'm using 50mm PVC pipe, and I cut 2 lengths. I cut a 60mm and a 70mm length. I'm not really sure which is going to be ideal. I think the 70 may be that little bit better. Having cut the pipe to length, I then ran a little bead of hot glue around one end of the pipe, just inside the end of the pipe, and did this to all of them. Once I'd done that, I used some PVC cement to glue them together in pairs initially, and then actually grouping them together in about 6 at a time. So I found doing the pairs, then bringing the others together was the best way to work. This makes them a little bit more stable than if you were to have them as individual pipes. Individual pieces of pipe are more likely to tip over. Having them in a group just stabilizes things. While the glue was setting, I then cut some strips out of some 90mm down pipe. Now this is a little bit thinner than the general PVC pipe. I cut this to a width a little bit wider than the actual PVC pipe that I was using. So I cut to a 60mm width. Then cut those rounds through so that it was able to open up, and what I wanted to achieve was to flatten it out. Now I've used a butane weeding gun to warm up the pipe and soften it so that I could flatten it. Other types of heat gun may be more appropriate. The issue with the butane gun is it's very hot. You've got to be really careful not to actually overheat the pipe and set it on fire. So you want to keep that flame moving all the time. Once you can actually flatten it out and get it flat entirely, you need to put something on to keep it nice and flat while it cools. With those flat pieces, I then used a hole saw to cut them out into discs. The safest way to do that is to make a little bit of a guide with some timber, and make sure that you have the PVC clamped in between nice and tight so that it can't move around. Then you can work with the guide to drill it out with the hole saw. Having now a number of those discs cut out, I used a drill to put a few more drain holes into those discs. Now, if you're doing this, make sure you're wearing appropriate safety gear, gloves, etc. Now, what these little discs are for is to be the bottoms of the plugs. So they just drop nicely into the PVC pipe and sit on the ring of glue that I put around the base. Now, if anyone's doing this, the pipe that I used was 50mm, and the hole saw that fits is a 54mm hole saw. It's actually the one that you would use to put a doorknob in. So quite convenient, one you're likely to have in your workshop. If you were using a smaller PVC pipe, say a 40mm, you would need a different size hole saw. And the smaller PVC pipe would probably be adequate for most of seedlings that you're going to do. It's only the larger ones really that you need that 50mm pipe for. To plant, I'm just making a little hole in there with a pencil. You can use just any type of stick, and I'm just putting one in each because what I'm using are these Blue Lake beans. Now, I keep my bean seed actually in the pod, which is probably a bit unconventional, but I think it's the way nature intended it to be. So I find it works quite well, keeps it nice and fresh. So dropping one in each, and just push him down, and then using a little bit more medium to cover those over. Now, you will notice that I packed it reasonably tight into here. When it actually comes to push it out, I want it reasonably tight. And so the concept now is that I can just push that up, as you can see, with the base underneath. And so I'll be able to just pop those out when the time comes to plant. And that should stay together reasonably well. So with them all in, I will again just water it lightly. And then pop them into a tray where they're easy to manage. And I can keep them moist as I need to. So that's the bean seed planted, and these little units are ready to germinate. They're nice to handle as a block like this. And if you've packed them reasonably tight like I did, they should come out as nice plugs with minimum root disturbance and be able to go into the ground and good start. If you are growing something like corn, which has a more upright leaf and is not spreading out, you could do it much simpler by not actually making these bases and actually just setting your PVC pipe onto something like some fly screen, which you could then actually remove and push them straight out through the bottom into the ground rather than through the top. But of course, with things like beans and zucchinis, the leaves are larger, and to go out the bottom would damage the leaf, so you need to be able to push it out the top, hence this design. So there's an idea if you want to have a go at it. I think it's going to work for me, but we'll see in a future video how well it goes when I actually come to plant them out.